So thank you for attending our presentation. I'm Karen Strickland, and with me is Regina Cristione. We are co-presidents for Citizens for Informed Land Use, or the acronym that we like to use, CILU. So Regina.
I just want to give you a little bit of history about CILU for those who don't know. CILU is a Homedale-based, nonpartisan grassroots group that has been working since 1998 to protect our open space and natural resources. During our last 23 years, we have been successful at various open space preservation initiatives to protect the watershed of the swimming reservoir, which supplies our drinking water. One of CILU's most significant accomplishments has been the preservation and development of the Reminiscent Brook Nature Preserve, formerly known as the Chase Tract. It's been turned into parkland and hiking trails. As you walk through the woods from Homedale Park to Bayonet Farm, you will be enjoying just one of the efforts of many CILU volunteers. CILU also promises government transparency, we wish we could promise, promotes government transparency, which requires an informed citizenry. It is that educational mission that we offer you this presentation this evening.
We are very fortunate, as I said again, to have Cherron Rountree with us. She will describe the many duties of Township Administrator, including those specifically related to open space acquisition and maintenance, because those are kind of our key areas of interest. Ms. Rountree comes to Homedale in 2019 with a very packed resume. She served as Eatontown's Borough Administrator, where she was involved in the redevelopment efforts for Monmouth Mall and Fort Monmouth. That was really very impressive. She also served as Business Administrator for Rahway, New Jersey, and worked for Union County in various capacities. She was employed by the Borough of Roselle as Director of Economic Development Programs, Urban Enterprise Zone Coordinator. Along with fulfilling her duties for Homedale, she's currently working part-time as Executive Director for Red Bank's Redevelopment Agency. And I just discovered that she teaches at Rutgers. So that's really impressive. If everyone make sure your sounds are off, please. Ms. Rountree earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and Psychology from Rutgers University and a Master of Public Administration from NYU. We are very thankful that she is willing to go up for evening to share her knowledge and experience with us. I know you're a very busy person and we really appreciate this. Please hold your questions until after her presentation. To ask a question, just write it in the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them at the end and ask the questions. So if, without further ado, we will turn the floor over to Cherron.
There we go. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Make sure
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much for having me. I have two screens, so I'm trying to look at you and my screen at the same time, so I apologize for that. It's a pleasure. It's so wonderful working in Homedale. As Karen said, I've worked in several communities throughout New Jersey, and I see the dedication and the time that the residents of Homedale put into the community, and it's really special. You have a really great town. So I was asked to kind of talk with you guys about the role of the Township Administrator and then how it might reach some of the goals of CILU. Anyone that knows me, I really do hate talking about myself. So I will run through and then I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss anything else that I have further. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. There we go. Does everybody see it?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Oh, that's why. How about now?
Yes, now.
Okay. Still working with two screens. So very hot topic here in Homedale these days. There are several, and for those, I know a lot of the people on here I do recognize, and some of this stuff might be information that you already know, but for those that don't, there are several forms of government that are allowed in the state of New Jersey. As Karen said, I teach at Rutgers, so I go into some of this stuff in depth generally. But here in Homedale, we have a township form of government, and the form of government really matters in terms of what role the administrator plays, as well as everybody else. So in township form of government, we have a township committee, as I think most people here probably know. On our township committee, we have 5 members who are elected at large in the community, and they serve 3-year terms. They're elected in a partisan election. And as such, in this type of government, the mayor is selected from those members of the township committee. And the real responsibility of the mayor, it's the mayor's meeting, and they hold the meeting. And there are certain responsibilities that the state of New Jersey gives to the office of the mayor. And so each year when a mayor is selected by the township committee, those responsibilities go to the mayor. The rest of the township, or the entire township committee, including the mayor, serves as the legislative body. And the township committee technically has all of the executive responsibilities that are not specifically given to a mayor in this form of government. So I always look at it as the township committee decides the policy, and the role of the administrator is to execute that policy that the township committee determines. Municipalities can choose to have a municipal administrator. Pretty much most towns do, whether sometimes you might have an administrator that's also a clerk or another responsibility in some of the smaller towns.
Sorry, wait one
Mute that
second. I just
person. I
admitted
don't know who
somebody.
it
I'm
is.
gonna remove.
I muted that person.
Thank you.
I think it was probably just a feedback. So years ago, when towns were a lot smaller and not as complicated, I think oftentimes the township committees managed some of the day-to-day. Members of the township committee might head up a particular department, but township governments can form by ordinance the position of a township administrator, and then delegate a lot of that executive responsibility to the township administrator, who is there on a day-to-day basis. And that's really the trend of what has happened in most communities over the years. So as the township administrator, I serve as the chief administrative officer for the township. So I am responsible for the day-to-day operations, and our town, we have a municipal ordinance. It's available, it's online to everybody, and it specifically outlines a lot of the responsibilities of the administrator. And then it always adds, or other duties as assigned by the township committee. So it's kind of a catch-all. If you don't know where to go, it goes to the township administrator, and I figure it out. I am lucky to be surrounded in Homedale with some fantastic staff members and team members. And we have wonderful department heads who actually get the work done. And the team of people that we have around us is really just incredible. But my job is to kind of coordinate all of those departments, to manage all of the personnel issues, and also coordinate between the many boards and agencies that we have in the township. So you're familiar with the zoning board or the planning board, the environmental commission. I see people on here are on some of these agencies, and they are autonomous agencies, and they manage their own meetings. Some of them are quasi judicial bodies, so they have a lot of independent responsibilities, but at the same time, they're the cost of their professionals, the employees, they all work directly for the township. So my job is to kind of balance out the helping and assisting those agencies do what they do without interfering with what they do. And all of the responsibilities cross over. Once the zoning board or the planning board or the environmental commission, once these agencies, and I'm just naming some, we have a lot of committees, and as I mentioned before, a lot of volunteers in Homedale. Once they make the decisions, as the municipal government, we have to execute them. So a lot of what I do will help focus goals and objectives. So in the coming weeks, you will see an advertisement or a meeting notice for the Township Committee. We're still nailing down the date, so I can't announce it yet, for a workshop committee meeting where the members of the Township Committee will look at a whole lot of potential goals and priorities. Throughout the year, I get feedback both from my department heads, but residents from the community, from members of the Township Committee, from members of volunteer communities on things that we want to work toward or accomplish throughout the year. My goal is to kind of put those all together and help outline what our objectives will be for any given year. It's my response. If it doesn't go right, it falls on me. And I always say that all of the bad stuff comes on my end. And I kind of serve as a tool between the Township Committee, the members of the public, and the staff. But there is a lot of authority and responsibility that is held in the Township Administrator job and in my job description. And every single day is different. I will definitely say that. So right now we're looking at the budget and trying to prepare a budget for this year. I know we're already into the year, but we're going to get it done earlier than normal this year. I work, so I think it's on the next slide, so I'm going to jump. These are some specific responsibilities that are placed in the ordinance on the Township Administrator. So personnel, and I will tell you, as a manager in government, and it's not just in Homedale, probably 80% of my day is dealing with some sort of personnel issue. We've had a lot of concerns surrounding the COVID pandemic. That kind of threw us all out for a loop, and our team was really wonderful. I brought what I call the dream team together, members from our Office of Emergency Management and the police department and public information to try to make sure that we were getting proper information out, but also to develop the policies for our employees and how they were going to work and keep functioning. So it was a quick turn of events. We in government, we're not used to remote work, but making sure that we got everybody up and running and we could still carry out the duties of government. Other things that we had to consider through the pandemic was staggering staffing. Some of our employees simply cannot work from home, unlike some jobs and responsibilities. Public Works can't work from home, but we wanted to make sure that if God forbid one person got COVID, that it wouldn't knock out the entire crew and then we wouldn't be able to get anything done. So looking at personnel issues, that's just one example. Making sure the health and insurance and the contracts are all in line and best representing the municipality. So that's what I look at in terms of personnel and human resources. As I mentioned, the budget, each year I meet with every single department and we go through their budget. We look at what they requested in previous years. We look at what they've spent in previous years, and we look at what they are going to need moving forward. A lot of people don't realize that the municipal budget, our operating budget, our day-to-day budget, we probably have about 5% of that budget is really discretionary. Most of it, the big chunk of the budget, it's already determined before we even open the books. That's contracts for employees, that's insurance costs, that's pension costs, certain contracts that we go out to bid. Down here, purchasing, you'll see on this list, also runs out of my office. And I always get very frustrated because a lot of times things in government cost a lot more than what you could do them at your house. Sometimes we'll get bids back or we'll work on a project, even like the firehouse, which we're building right now. And you see the price per square foot of something. It's like, are you kidding me? I could do that for a lot cheaper if I did it at home. But there are very specific rules and regulations that the state of New Jersey puts upon local government agencies to promote transparency, to make sure that contracts are given fairly. But as a result, oftentimes some of those regulations do increase the cost, and navigating to make sure that we're following the rules and also doing the best that we can for the municipality. So that goes hand in hand, the purchasing aspect with the budgeting aspect. And so in our budget meetings, I sit with our QPA, qualified purchasing agent, our CFO, and each department head as we go through that. So it's the responsibility of the administrator to prepare a budget and present it to the Township Committee, at which case they can make any changes that they want. a big part of the budget, and something that is not, that we do have a lot of discretion over, is the capital budget. And that's the wish list that every department has, and a lot of groups have, and we'll talk about that when we talk about open space in town. A lot of residents have strong opinions on where we should spend our capital budget. So we look at that. And what I will say is, from an administration perspective, I really do rely heavily on our department heads and their needs. They are the ones out there every single day doing it. But we do require every department head, we look out 6 years. So the capital budget isn't necessarily once the governing body approves it, the money's not there. It's really just setting a plan, and it's setting a plan looking 6 years out. Now, something can happen 3 years from now that we didn't anticipate, and we have to go back to that plan and make adjustments. But it's important to kind of look at it far reaching so that we can plan accordingly. One of the things that I'll point out in Homedale that we're trying to figure out a way around is, if you've noticed, we've purchased a few fire trucks lately. What happens is fire trucks have a useful life. I mean, technically a useful life of 20 years. They usually can last a little bit longer than that. But 20 years ago, approximately, we bought a lot of fire trucks. So all of them are passing their useful life. They're passing their, at a certain point, they're not going to pass their pump tests. And so they are going to need to be replaced. But they're really large purchases. They're around $1 million each. So having to purchase one every year for 4 years is really difficult, but we're in that position of, if we don't, they're not going to pass the standards. So we're trying to be creative, looking forward as we buy them now, to figure out how we can better space it out 20 years from now. So budgeting and purchasing and fiscal affairs are all really, really important. And like, I've been doing government for almost 20 years, and the one thing that every single town is the same is taxes. Residents really are always worried about taxes. It's the one thing I can guarantee you. I don't care what kind of community, urban, suburban, everybody worries about taxes. And so that's a major aspect of the Township Administrator office, and that's in any form of government. Collective bargaining and employee contracts I manage and also do the negotiations for. So right now, our PBA, their contract expired on December 31st. So we're in the middle of negotiations with the PBA. And it's always a delicate balance with that, because you're negotiating with people that you're working with every day. And we really do care about the employees, and we want to make sure that we take care of them. But at the same time, when you go into the negotiation, you're on different sides of the table. Although right now I like to sit on the same side, just it makes the negotiations easier. Contracts. So we administer all the contracts for all of the professionals in the township. So that's our municipal engineer, our attorneys, our township planner, which is near and dear to this group. And then our software contracts, our maintenance contracts, all of that comes out of the administration office. Grants, I'm very happy to report that we've been really stepping up our efforts to get some grants. Recently, you might have heard, we were just awarded $114,000 from the county for a bike and pedestrian path, or the first phase of a bike and pedestrian path in Homedale. It'll start up by Crawford's Corner Road. The goal is to get it all the way down to Cross Farm. That's not going to be in this one grant. This is the 114,000 is a matching grant. So we'll hopefully put up the other 114,000 and get a good chunk of that path. That was actually the idea of our Traffic and Bike Safety Committee, which is another great group of volunteers. So we're really happy on that. We also have been told, but I haven't received the official notification yet, but it looks like we'll be receiving $50,000 toward from the state for engineering costs associated with some improvements that might be needed up at our swim club. We recently just finished an analysis of the swim club and got a report with recommendations for that. I believe as we speak, the Recreation Committee is meeting now, and they're looking at those recommendations from that consultant. We've gotten some grants I believe today we were notified in our police department, we've been giving a grant to, along with several other towns in the Bayshore area, to help set up some distracted driving stops and to promote people to actually pay attention to the road. We've had, I don't know if it's because a lot of people weren't driving when COVID wasn't happening and people are now back on the road. A really positive thing is the DUI stops that we've done, and our DUI cases have really dropped, which is a wonderful thing. And I hope more people are taking Ubers and being more responsible. Most people are wearing their seatbelts. So we always used to get Click It or Ticket, a grant to run that program in our police department. But one thing that we're realizing, we have a lot more distracted driving. So we were just awarded a grant to do a campaign to promote people being aware with their driving. So those are just some examples. We're always looking for additional opportunities. We're looking for some things for the fire department right now. But that all comes out of our office, and we've been making a pretty strong push for that. Communication and complaints. We get a lot of those into the office, and sometimes when the answer isn't obvious, we have to be creative, and we have to work with residents to solve problems, because oftentimes problems are unique. And so when it's not a simple answer, it gets to our office. And then overall improvements that we need for the town and for the public. So those are some of the responsibilities. Again, we always have that the catch-all of other duties and other responsibilities as assigned. And that's when, and actually it's probably one of my favorite parts of the job, when the unique projects come up. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about our role when it comes to land use and open space. So the master plan, everybody hears about the master plan. And I think oftentimes in my experience, people don't necessarily understand what it is. This is one of those things that is the responsibility of the planning board. So the municipal land use law, it's state law, and it gives the full responsibility of developing the master plan to the planning board. And the purpose of developing a master plan is to protect public health and promote the general welfare of the community. The idea is to lay out, in New Jersey, we are very much a home rule state. Every community, gets very passionate about their community. And the MLUL allows towns to create their own zoning laws and their own rules, but they must have this master plan that was developed. There's several elements to the master plan. Again, this comes out of the planning board, and they work with a planner to develop it. These are the several elements that may be part of them. All master plans do not have all of these elements, although they're starting to. They always have to have a land use aspect. They always have to have a statement of objectives. Almost all of them have a housing plan. The circulation plan talks about transportation and getting through the community. Utility service, pretty obvious, your water, your sewer, your electric. And I'm not going to read all of them to you, but there are different aspects of the plan, and you can look at them separately. So what I will say is, and I'm going to talk about it in a second, but with like historic preservation or recreation, there are certain grants available to communities, and needing to update aspects of the plan might come up as a requirement to get those grants. So we're doing some of that right now. And it's really important to get feedback from the community and members of the community on those plan aspects. Again, it doesn't necessarily come out of the administration office. It's part of the planning board, but there's always an opportunity for members of the community to give feedback and to comment. And planners, our engineers, our professionals, administrators, we look to the master plan when making decisions. So it's really important that what the community wants gets into those various elements, because we'll refer to it to say, hey, does this, if a proposal comes across our desk or a project comes across our desk, does it fit within the master plan, what we've already laid out? Excuse me. In Homedale's master plan, it was developed in 2004, probably due for another one. We had a re-exam in 2010, and there was another re-exam in 2020, although it really was the housing element as it related to our affordable housing obligation. Open space, I have to say, here in Homedale, I think open space it's just incredible, and it helps make Homedale what it is. I think I might be preaching. Oh, did that go? Sorry about that. Oh, I might be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but just the recreational and social value of open space, and nothing showed this more than COVID. We kept our parks open in Homedale where the county and the state didn't necessarily, and the use that our parks got and the feedback that we got from the community, just so excited that they had an escape, a place to go. It really matters. The aesthetic and the economic value. I mean, places like Bayonet, which is such a beautiful site, and we have weddings there, and so it does bring some additional revenue into the city. Obviously, the environmental benefits, and just I really think the open space in Homedale helps make it what it is. Apparently the voters believe that too, because we in this past year in the election, you guys approved an increase in the open space tax. So we estimate that we'll raise about $1.5 million for that in the next year. It's about a $70 increase on the per house. What happened? Okay, sorry. Sorry, hitting the wrong button there. What that can be used for, a lot of people ask. So acquisition, and I think that's the obvious one that everybody thinks, okay, we can buy more land with it, which is wonderful. And we'd love to buy more land. And if anybody has a suggestion, send it my way. I'm happy to look into it. But it also has a lot of other uses, historic preservation. And the one thing I like to point out here, Karen, is the Harding House.
Yes, thank you.
Which is, I think, a treasure of Homedale, and but it does need some TLC. That's another grant that we've applied for. We haven't heard back on that one yet. But open space money can be used to help preserve some of our historic structures in town. Recreational improvements, there's lots of ideas for recreational improvements, and welcome all of the feedback, but we have the rec committee talking about that now. Floodplain, which is a huge issue here in Homedale. It's something that I get a lot of feedback, probably second or third behind taxes would be flooding issues in town. And this money can be used to help offset that. What I will say, separate and apart from the Open Space Trust Fund, we did recently go out for an RFP to do a complete townwide stormwater management study to kind of look at the various areas of flooding throughout the town and make determinations on what needs to be done. I hope that the Township Committee will award that contract tomorrow night at its Township Committee meeting, and we can begin that work. It's an extensive plan. It's going to take several months. It is quite a costly endeavor. However, the wonderful part about that is with the American Rescue, ARPA, American Rescue Recovery Plan Act, I might have messed that up. The township is set to receive about a little over $1.5 million. And there are very specific uses for that funding. It can't be used to offset taxes. It can't be used for salaries. It can't be used to make a pension payment. There are very specific uses. Loss of revenue as a result of COVID, which we were very lucky we did not have much of. It can be used for broadband infrastructure, which we probably don't need very much in town. Hazard pay for employees, other COVID or pandemic mitigation services. But one of the other big ones is, sanitary sewer improvements, infrastructure, but also clean water and making sure that our stormwater system is up and running and functioning is really important to having clean water. And so this management plan can be funded through those funds that we're getting as a grant. And we'll look at the town as a whole to ensure that we have a functioning stormwater system so that our regular drinking water stays clean and good. So we're really excited to start that project, and I think it will help a lot of families throughout the town. Another one that's often forgotten when you talk about open space, and we get all of this land and that's great, but once you have the land, you have to maintain it. Nobody wants to have overgrowth and have, pests and have issues. And so oftentimes, and it's not a Homedale unique, you like to get the land and then people forget about it afterwards. So making sure that we keep up the facilities that we do have. And then farmland preservation, which we've done a pretty decent job in Homedale. So these are some properties that we acquired since we started the Open Space Trust Fund, which was back in 1998. And it was only a penny at that point. And then I think in 2000, they increased it to 2.5 cents. And then last year we increased it to 3.5 cents. These were some of the acquisitions that we did have them. And then these are some of the possibilities that have been discussed. Nothing is set in stone yet, but properties that seem to be larger parcels that are at high risk, the West Farm property on Red Hill Road and Homedale Road that has been identified, Van Brackle. Again, I welcome anybody that has a suggestion on open space that we can acquire, because it's really, it's so important to keeping Homedale as beautiful as it is. Other recreational improvements that have been mentioned are the trails and the bikeways. Like I just mentioned, the grant that we got, that's only an initial phase of a 3 or 4 phase project. Playgrounds, we've done some recent playground upgrades, but to do some more of those. Athletic fields, which I always brace myself when I mention here in Homedale, although it looks like the high school is building a field, so maybe we won't need as many. And then ADA compliance, because a lot of these properties and buildings were acquired well before those considerations were being made. As I mentioned, the Harding House, and then farmland preservation in general. Some funding sources and some lingo that people probably hear frequently. Green Acres and the Department of Environmental Protection, that offers municipalities very low interest loans and sometimes grants. If you accept Green Acres property, the land in perpetuity has to be used for recreation and conservation. Always, it cannot be touched. They do have a diversion process. It is a monster. It is very difficult to divert any land. Key thing to remember, though, is that any land that is acquired through Green Acres funding has to be open to everybody in the state. You cannot limit it to Homedale residents or Monmouth County residents. You cannot use, and you can't have any indoor recreation on property that's funded through Green Acres. And you have to maintain the signs. Green Acres will actually come out and do some like spot inspections and make sure you're following their rules and regulations. I've heard of many towns that have gotten in trouble because they didn't. Then there's also the Department of Agriculture that does farmland preservation, and we've gotten funds through that. When they do that, and we actually have funding set aside for Homedale if we find property that we want to acquire for that, or that we can acquire. Part of the process, though, in Homedale is we're not taking anything by eminent domain. We have to have a willing seller. But with the Department of Agriculture grant program, they will fund the difference between what a potential seller could sell at market rate if the property was going to be developed versus keeping that property preserved as farmland and somebody maintaining it as farmland. They'll help cut the cost of the difference to make that a reality so that the property isn't sold to a developer for a larger use. And then another thing that's often thrown out there and discussed is the Rossi or Rosie. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I've tried to get an answer on what it officially is called, and depends on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. I say Rossi, but some people do say Rosie. So I don't think there's a true correct answer, but it's recreation, open space inventory. What I think a lot of people often get confused as to what it is. The Rossi is simply a database that the Green Acres program keeps. Being on the Rossi in and of itself doesn't do anything. It doesn't preserve the land. It's the database that the state keeps. And what that is, and you have to update it in order to get more funding from the state. So what they require is any land that has received Green Acres funding is automatically placed on the Rossi. But also at the time that you're accepting that Green Acres funding, any land that's being used for conservation purposes at the time that you accept that money is also on the Rossi. And just failing to put the land on the Rossi doesn't mean that it's okay, then it's fair game and you could not use this land. The reason for this is the state doesn't want you, they don't want to give you $1 million to purchase property X, and then you go around and you go around and sell property Y and make $2 million and you sell it for a developer, and now you don't have open space. The whole point of the Green Acres program is to create more open space and more conserved land within the state. So they don't want you to say, oh, well, now that we got this beautiful property, we can get rid of that property and make a lot of money off of it. So really, that's why they keep this inventory, so that they can go back and look and say, hey, wait, this was open space when you took our money in 1998, so it has to stay as open space in perpetuity. And that's really what it is. So it's a database. The real way to preserve land is to, whether it's through a Green Acres program or through the municipality, just committing to keeping that open and preserved. But it really doesn't kick in until you accept new funding from the DEP. Like I said, there are ways to divert land from any Green Acres program. It's incredibly hard. It's a very, very extensive process. It has to be approved by the state. Depending on what you're going to use it for, there are ratios. So it might be a 4-to-1 ratio if it's a public purpose. It might be a 20-to-1 ratio if you're going to use it for a private or a development purpose. What I will say is oftentimes, or I have seen towns that, and I'm probably not the best audience, but I'm nothing if not honest. I've seen towns get very frustrated and have to spend millions of dollars to change project plans because particular property had been preserved that they didn't necessarily intended. So you can't touch property that has been preserved through the Green Acres property, meaning if you need to do a stormwater adjustment, and that's the one instance that I have with one of the towns that had to spend a couple $1 million to divert the stormwater system around a piece of property in the middle of the town. It was a much more urban town than here. In the middle of the town, because you can't do anything on land that is preserved through open space. So it's just something I always caution municipalities to think about what land you're preserving through the Green Acres program versus what you're doing on your own, because you kind of give up some ownership over what you're allowed to do on your property once you combine it with a Green Acres program. So those are kind of some of the land use general overall concepts that I deal with on a regular basis, and especially as it relates to open space and some of the challenges that we face. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Okay, stop your screen sharing.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. I learned some good stuff. That was good. So people can please go ahead and put some questions in the chat. Just, that little box at the bottom, just write some questions in there. So first question is, how can citizens provide feedback on the master plan? I think you talked about it somewhat, but maybe, just be more specific.
Sure. So again, as I mentioned, the master plan is a function of the the planning board, which is its own autonomous agency. So anytime that they're doing a re-examination, they will reach out to the community, or they will ask the community. I mean, all of the planning board meetings are public and they're open to the public, and they must be properly advertised. So they will afford an opportunity for residents to provide feedback whenever they're looking at any particular aspect of the master plan. Sometimes the boards, and I always encourage boards to reach out to groups similar to this to get their specific feedback, because groups like this exist. And so when they are doing a specific aspect of it, maybe not the utility aspect, but the recreation or the open space, they will reach out to CELU, they'll reach out to the Recreation Committee, they'll reach out to various organizations and groups to solicit the feedback, but any resident can just, attend a meeting and participate. All of the agendas are published online. We also have a feature on our website where residents can sign up, so you can get alerted anytime an agenda is posted to the website. So if you're particularly interested in, and it doesn't just have to be the master plan, if you're interested in planning in general, in zoning in general, in the Environmental Commission or the Charter Study Commission or Township Committee meetings, you can sign up on our website, get alerts every time that's posted, look at the agenda, see if there's something that interests you, and come and provide feedback. There's always a public comment portion. Separately, we have an email address, info@homedaletownship.com. I have an email address, Rountree@homedaletownship.com. So if people maybe don't feel comfortable speaking at a public meeting, it can be intimidating for some people, or they can't make a particular meeting, they're more than welcome to email us. And I would say, it might seem that people aren't necessarily involved, because there's not, 100 people coming out to our township committee meetings, but we do get, every day there are dozens and dozens of residents that contact the town in some capacity, whether it's my office, whether it's community development, whether it's the police department. And most of the time we try to solve their questions or concerns so that they don't have to come to a public meeting.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
So it sounds to me like we have to follow the agenda. We sign up, we follow the agenda, especially like for our group, we have people go to meetings, follow the agenda. When we hear that there's going to be an update, then we, I guess, try to see the documents ahead of time if we can.
They're all published. They're all published online. They're, drafts are published online. And there's that opportunity for the feedback.
Yeah, so we get the draft, we read it, and then we come to the meeting prepared to say, yeah, you wrote this, but we think that.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so now this is back to the Green Acres issue. A question is, so really a town cannot put an underground water main or a storm drain through Green Acres land, even if it's restored to its original condition visually?
No, they're so strict on what you can do. If you are doing diversion for a public purpose, it's easier to divert, which means I would have to look it up, and it depends on the purpose. And when I say divert, it means I'm going to disturb an acre of land. So now I'm going to have to preserve 4 acres of land someplace else because of the acre that I'm going to disturb. And if it's a public purpose, I think the minimum is a 4-to-1 ratio. It might be a 2-to-1 in certain instances. But if it's something not as community oriented, like a developer coming in, it's something like 20 or 30-to-1 match that you have to do the land. But you can't do, or if it's you say if it's restored to its natural capacity, if there's something that's already there, if there's a line that's there when it's preserved, that's a different story, and you're making a repair or a correction. That's different than if you're like creating a brand new piece of infrastructure that has to be put in place as a result of, something changing, or stormwater or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's
So-
very strict.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what people, you keep hearing people talk about that and talking about cross farms and what should be done over there and should be on the, I like Rossi too.
Well, that's a really, really great example because we have a leaf composting facility at Cross Farm. And it has to be on part of the Cross Farm that's not part of Green Acre Preserved Land, because that's not an acceptable use of Green Acres Preserved Land. Just like indoor recreation isn't an approved use. So there's funded and unfunded Green Acres land. If it's not funded through Green Acres, you have a lot more leeway than if it's funded through if it ever received any funding through Green Acres. That's the kind of thing that you can't do, like indoor recreational facility if it's been funded by Green Acres. So they do make that distinction.
What's unfunded? Green Acres.
Unfunded would be land that's been preserved by the community as conserved land, but never received funding from the state. So Cross Farm, part of Cross Farm, and it like there's a crazy map. Part of Cross Farm was received funding through Green Acres, and I was before I got here, so I don't know if it was for an improvement of the farm or an acquisition of the farm. Part of it received it through Green Acres. That's funded land. The other part of Cross Farm, the township acquired on its own without getting funding from the state, and that's unfunded land. That's where the leaf compost facility is. So we're allowed to do the leaf compost, but honestly, we had to literally move a fence and moved where we were keeping leaves because it was encroaching on the funded portion of the land. It was like we had to move it by like 20 feet or something. They came out and they were giving us a fine, and then we had to work with them, and it was a whole bunch of back and forth, and we had to like move it slightly.
Oh, we didn't
It
even
can
know
be very
about that.
quick.
All this stuff,
Yeah.
you probably deal with stuff all the time that we don't even have any clue.
I try, and you know what, if I'm doing my job well, you don't know about it because we try to fix it before it becomes a big issue. But that was one of the first things when I got here. We were getting this like fine from the state, and I'm like, we gotta fix this. And I mean, it's not the big, bad, terrible state. They'll work with you as long as you're trying to fix whatever the problem is.
All right, so here is, it's welcome aboard. And then if we would like to preserve the sod farm behind Cross Farms Park as open space, so it could never be developed, what would be the best strategy? Rossi or Green Acres or something else?
So again, the Rossi is just a database. So it doesn't actually do anything, and it doesn't mean anything until you accept the Green Acres funding. So the best way, if you accept Green Acres funding, that's pretty much, I mean, nothing, I will never say never, but that's pretty much the hardest way to override a preserved land would be accepting money from Green Acres and then having it placed on that list of preserved space. Now, that doesn't, I mean, again, that's also limiting what the township can choose to do with its own property then. So if the sod farmer said, if decide you don't want it to be a sod farm, you want it to be, I'm making this up, a corn farm or something, and they need to, the farmer, she needs to build a shed on that land, she might not be able to. That might be a little bit, I would have to check on that, if it's preserved through Green Acres. Now, something like the Farmland Preservation Program, they can do things to support the property and the farm and make sure the farm continues to work. So it depends on what you want to do with the land, but probably the most restrictive is accepting Green Acres funding. But you're really handing a lot of the determination of the future to the state in that case, and the state making determinations.
Is there a category called historical land?
So there's historical properties, and there are several levels to that. And I'm not even going to pretend to be an expert, because there are properties that are on like the historic registry, and the federal historic registry. There's a state historic preservation program. You can have your own historic preservation. They all have different requirements. And that's one thing, again, that I always caught, and I'm a history fan myself, but talking about how, as I mentioned, how sometimes doing things in government can cost a lot more. Putting things on certain registries can require that you need to restore a property in a certain fashion. And so you can't just paint a wall that needs paint. You have to get the paint that was the same paint that was used when the property was built. And it might end up costing significantly more to do that. Also, just because something's on the federal registry doesn't mean it's necessarily open to the public. So a great example, and one of the most wonderful things I think we have in Homedale, the horn antenna, that is on the National Historic Registry. Doesn't mean it's open to the public. That antenna is technically privately owned. It's owned by people that just bought the Nokia property. I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but they own that horn antenna. All it being on the National Historic Registry means is that it can't be destroyed. But it doesn't mean that you have to open it up to the public or allow the public access to it.
Interesting.
Yeah. I want it. That's why I bring that one up, because I want the township to have control of that one. It's probably one of the coolest things.
That's really a great idea. I never heard that one said before, but I like it. Appreciate that. I was just a little curious about your distracted driving grant. How can you, is that like texting while driving? I mean, how do people?
Texting while driving, talking on the phone while driving, which I don't think people do as much. Yeah, they can just pull people over, similar to they pull you over if you're drunk driving or you're not wearing your seatbelt. And, you know, I haven't talked to I literally found out about this today. So I haven't talked to the police department of specifically what we're going to do, but we can set up, you know, stops and, you know, issue warnings and let people know it's really become a problem. We've had several accidents because people are just not paying attention. And we know because technology is both, it's beautiful in some senses. It also causes some of these accidents on the other hand, but we can go back when we have an accident. We can see, oh yeah, there was a text being sent precisely when this accident happened. So we know when people are distracted.
Interesting.
So we really want to push as much as we can to tell people, stop, pay attention to driving. And I will say personally, from my experience, I drive an hour each way. People are crazy. They really are driving. They're just not paying attention. We're used to doing a whole bunch of things at once, but driving is pretty serious. And I see them all the time. I get notices from the police department.
Well, I've been wanting to say thank you for that four-way stop at Tocaloosa and Holland, Telegraph Hill Road. I go through there all the time, and that four-way stop is great. So
I love it. Every time I go there myself, I'm like, I'm so glad we did this.
And I'm like, why didn't they do this years ago when my kids were learning to drive?
Right.
It's so much better. Let's see, does anyone else have any other questions? So you have been wonderful. This has been just really clearing up a lot of issues for me. And I really kind of appreciate you coming here and talking. Regina, do you want to kind of fill us in on what we as CELU are doing next? If you guys enjoyed this meeting and you want to come back, Regina's going to tell you what you can come do next.
And Karen, if
Yeah,
I just
like
may say, if anybody, I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to, if anybody thinks of something or you have a question, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. My name is C. Rountree, no D in my last name, at homedeltownship.com, or call me in town hall. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I really value the feedback from the community. So even ideas, you know, we'll look into it and try to make it happen. Sometimes we just didn't think of it. And that's why we need a lot of heads to help us. So.
Aaron, I have a question.
Oh, another question. All right, Chris.
The stormwater plan that the township is going to review tomorrow,
Mhm.
you say flooding.
Did I say flooding? You cut out a little bit.
It's where the Homedale Environmental Commission has been looking at flooding of the Waykay Creek,
Yes.
studying it. And we have a plan that's being developed through Rutgers. And we just want to make sure that we're not duplicating.
For sure. I'm very familiar with the plan from Rutgers. Although I'm afraid and I love Rutgers. I went there, I teach there, I'm all for Rutgers. We have several times tried to reach out. Somebody's at my door. But so it will take that information when, and hopefully if that comes out relatively soon, it will incorporate that. They're not going to duplicate those efforts for sure. Give me 1 second. I think I heard a knock on my door. If you can give me one moment.
Okay.
So yeah, it won't be, we'll take what they've gotten and incorporate that into a much, much larger study.
How big do you anticipate the study to be?
The entire township. It's going to look at areas throughout the township. It's going to do some GIS mapping of our sanitary and stormwater systems. It's going to solicit feedback from the community of like areas that we might not be aware of where there's flooding issues so that the engineers can go out and look at that. So it's going to be incredibly comprehensive. I'm very familiar with the study that Rutgers is doing. I can't wait to get that information and have the engineers incorporate that into what they're doing.
This is great. This is really needed to be done. It's really important.
It's gonna take a long time, but I'm really hopeful that when it's accomplished, there will be specific actionable deliverables. Half the time when there are stormwater and sanitary issues and clean drinking water, there's a lot of funding available. The new infrastructure bill that was passed at the federal government, at the federal level, has a lot of opportunities. There's a session that we're going to later this week for the opportunities within that bill, but they always require that you know what you're doing. And in Homedale, we don't even know what we need to do yet. So this study is going to tell us, okay, these are the areas, these are the most severe, these are what you need to concentrate on. You need this, you need that. It's going to kind of give us the blueprint to then dive into the specific areas a little bit deeper and get some actual results. So it's still high level, but it will give us that plan to move ahead in each area.
Environmental would like to be involved in the planning process of that.
For sure, the consultants will definitely be reaching out to all of the appropriate groups and agencies, and then the public at large.
Yeah, the Environmental Commission's been talking about this a lot, and we've had, and the neighbors have been coming and talking to us.
They've talked to me too, so yes, I'm very familiar.
Yeah, I bet. Well, go and answer your door.
That's okay. They stopped, so
Oh,
maybe
okay.
it was.
All right.
whatever.
Okay, so I'll pick it up right here.
All right.
Thank you, Cherron. It was very interesting, and you can tell you like your work. You love
Thank you.
yourself. I do want to tell people about upcoming meetings. In February, we have a very special treat. We will have on February 21st at 7:30, a talk by Mr. John D. Liu, who is the former television producer and cameraman for CBS News. He is currently the Ecosystem Ambassador for the Common Land Foundation and visiting research fellow at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology. How to configure a flourishing path for our ecological, economic, and social world whereby we can all thrive. This presentation is part of the work that he presented to the United Nations just a day or two ago. So we're very excited about that. That's February 21st. On March 21st, we will have Jay Sims, the Monmouth County Recycling Coordinator, will talk to us about composting. For April, we are still finalizing our plans for our annual meeting, but we do want you to know for the first time in 3 years, because of COVID, we are returning to the Earth Day Festival. That will be on Sunday, May 1st at Bayonet Farm. Okay, Karen, back to you.
Okay, so you were breaking up a little bit, but I hope people heard that Earth Day, we're hoping will be May 1st this year outside. And so people put it on your calendars for a lovely Earth Day celebration. And then next month, February 21st, Dr. Liu will be talking, and that's going to be a really interesting presentation. All right, so if there are no other questions for Cherron, thank you so much again for coming. So if you like this meeting and like the kind of things we're doing, we hope you will join us. If you can join us, if you want to see this recording again, it's going to be on our YouTube channel, CILU, C-I-L-U, YouTube, and you'll see it. Our website, www.homedale-cilu.org, And Facebook, you can come on to. It's very easy to become a CELU member. All you do is you have to pay $20, send it to Margaret Klusky, and you're a member. So we hope you will join us and see you next month, February 21st on Zoom. Good night,
Stay warm,
everyone.
everyone.